There is a moment that comes after every heartbreak that nobody warns you about. It is not the moment they stop texting you. It is not the moment you see them post a photo like nothing happened. It is the moment you realize the silence was never the wound. You were. If you have ever tried no contact and felt like it was working, right up until the second you were alone with your own mind at 2 in the morning, this video is for you. Because today we are going to talk about something far more painful than someone else's silence. We are going to talk about the war you are fighting against yourself, and how the ancient Stoics, men who buried children, who were exiled from their homes, who were betrayed by emperors they served, learned to end that war for good. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient philosophy meets modern pain, and where we turn suffering into strength. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing, because what you are about to hear may change the way you experience loss for the rest of your life. Let's begin. Part 1. The lie we tell ourselves about silence. Somewhere along the way we all absorbed the same idea. We were told that if we could just endure the silence long enough, if we could go 30 days, 60 days, 90 days without reaching out, without checking their story, without driving past their street, we would heal. No contact became the sacred ritual of modern heartbreak, a kind of secular fasting. Cut off the source and the wound closes. And there is some truth in that. Distance does matter. Space does matter. But here is what nobody tells you, and here is what will save you years of unnecessary suffering if you let it sink in today. The silence was never the thing hurting you. Your relationship with the silence is what hurts you. Let that settle for a moment. Picture two people. Both are going through no contact with someone who left them. Both have blocked the same number. Both are staring at the same blank, silent phone screen. But one of them is spiraling, checking, refreshing, imagining, replaying every conversation, convincing themselves that the silence is a message, a punishment, a proof of their own unworthiness. The other person feels the ache too. Make no mistake, they are human. But they are not adding a second layer of suffering on top of the first. They feel the loss, and they let it pass through them like weather. Same silence, two completely different experiences of it. This is not a coincidence. This is not because one person got over it faster through sheer luck. This is because one of them, knowingly or not, was practicing something the Stoics discovered over 2,000 years ago, a truth so simple that it sounds almost insulting the first time you hear it, and yet so profound that entire lives have been rebuilt around it. Epictetus, a man who spent the first part of his life enslaved, who had his leg broken by a master's cruelty, who owned nothing, who had every external freedom stripped from him, wrote something that should be tattooed on the inside of every heartbroken person's eyelids. He said that people are not disturbed by things, but by the opinions they hold about those things. Read that again. People are not disturbed by things, but by their judgments about those things. Their silence is a thing. It is neutral. It is simply an absence of sound, an absence of messages, an absence of contact. It has no opinion about you. It carries no verdict. It is not sitting there deciding that you are unlovable, unworthy, forgettable. Silence cannot do that. Silence cannot do anything at all. It is you, in the privacy of your own mind, who takes that neutral silence and builds an entire courtroom around it. You become the prosecutor, the jury, and the condemned all at once. You take a blank space and you fill it with the worst possible interpretation your mind can conjure, and then you suffer as though that interpretation were fact. This is the hidden violence of heartbreak. It is not what they did. It is what you are doing to yourself in the aftermath, often without even realizing it. If you are watching this and something just clicked in your chest, do me a favor and type the word silence in the comments below. I want to know how many of you have felt this exact thing, the ache that isn't about them anymore, but about the story you built in their absence. Let's see how many of us are in this together tonight. Part 2. The story of a man who lost everything and found peace. Let me tell you about a man named Marcus Agrippinus. You will not find him in most philosophy textbooks. He does not have the fame of Marcus Aurelius or the literary legacy of Seneca. But Epictetus, his student, told a story about him that has survived for 2,000 years because of how astonishing it is. Agrippinus lived during a dangerous period in Rome, when the Emperor Nero was hunting down anyone he perceived as a threat, exiling or executing senators on a whim. One day word reached Agrippinus that his own trial before the Senate had begun in his absence. He was going to be judged, likely exiled, possibly worse. And how did this man respond to news that would send most of us into a spiral of panic and dread? He said, "Well, let us go and take our exercise." He went to the gymnasium. He worked out. He lived his day exactly as he had planned it. Later a message arrived. He had been condemned. Exile was his sentence. His response? To Rome or to Aricia? Meaning simply, where shall my exile take me? Let's have lunch first. When someone expressed shock at how calmly he was taking the loss of his homeland, his position, his entire former life, Agrippinus responded with something extraordinary. He said that Rome was not his true country, but only the place where he happened to be born. His real country, the one that could never be exiled from him, was the one he carried within, the one built from his own character, his own judgments, his own choices. Now here is the connection I want you to sit with. Agrippinus was not hurt by the exile. He was hurt, if at all, only by what he decided the exile meant. He refused to hand his peace over to a piece of news, to a verdict from a senate, to circumstances entirely outside of his control. His body could be relocated, his property could be seized, but the part of him that mattered most, his judgment, his character, his inner citadel, remained entirely his own, untouched. This is precisely what is available to you right now, in this exact moment, regarding the person who has gone silent on you. Their silence, like Agrippinus's exile, is a fact. It happened. You cannot undo it, and dwelling on whether it is fair or unfair changes nothing about its existence. But what you decide it means about you, about your worth, about your future, about whether you are somehow broken or unlovable, that is not a fact. That is a story, and you are the author of that story, whether you realize it or not. Most people never realize they are the author. They think the silence is writing the story for them. They think the absence of a text message is dictating the terms of their self-worth. But it never was. It never can be. You have been the author this entire time, and the moment you understand that, everything begins to shift. Part 3. Why the pain of rumination is worse than the pain of loss. I want to introduce you to a distinction that will change how you understand your own suffering. There is a difference between pain and suffering. Pain is what happens the moment you learn someone has left you. The moment the silence begins, the initial jolt to the system. That pain is real. It is biological. It is almost unavoidable. And the Stoics never claimed we should feel nothing. Even Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, admitted to grief. He was human. He lost children. He wept. But suffering is different from pain. Suffering is what happens when the mind takes that initial jolt and replays it, again and again, embellishing it, exaggerating it, projecting it into an imagined future and dragging it backward into a reinterpreted past. Suffering is the story you tell about the pain, told over and over, each retelling adding a new layer of despair. This is what modern psychology now calls rumination. Though the Stoics understood the mechanism long before it had a clinical name, Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, in the private journal we now call Meditations, a reminder so simple it is almost shocking, that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Think about what he is really saying here. The silence happened once. It is a single event, but your mind, left unchecked, can replay it 1,000 times a day. Every replay is a fresh wound you are inflicting on yourself voluntarily, even though the original event is long over. The person who hurt you had one opportunity to hurt you. You, through rumination, are giving yourself that same wound over and over, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, long after they have moved on entirely unaware of the war raging inside your head. Doesn't that infuriate you a little when you say it out loud like that? They get to live their life, while you are the one still holding the knife, sinking it into the same spot again and again, calling it love, calling it grief, when really it has become self-inflicted punishment. This is the moment I want to challenge you, not gently, directly. How many times today have you replayed the same memory, the same message, the same imagined scenario of what they might be doing right now? Each replay was a choice, even if it didn't feel like one in the moment. And if it was a choice, however unconscious, it means you have more power here than you have been told. If this is hitting close to home, I want you to comment the words, "I see it now," below. Not for me, for you, because naming a pattern out loud is the first step to breaking it, and I want you to have a record, a moment in time, where you admitted this to yourself. Part 4. The dichotomy of control and the person who left. Epictetus opened his entire philosophical framework with a single, deceptively simple distinction. Some things are within our control, and some things are not. Within our control are our judgments, our desires, our aversions, our own actions, in short. Everything that is truly our own doing. Not within our control are our bodies, our property, our reputation, and crucially, other people, their choices, their feelings, and yes, their silence. Here is where most heartbroken people go wrong, not out of stupidity, but out of a very human and very understandable confusion. They spend all of their energy trying to control something that was never controllable in the first place. Another person's feelings, another person's choice to stay silent, another person's willingness to explain themselves or come back. You cannot control whether they text you. You cannot control whether they think about you at 11 p.m. the way you think about them. You cannot control whether they regret it, whether they miss you, whether they ever reach out again. None of that has ever been within your power, not for a single second. No matter how much energy you pour into hoping, checking, waiting, or interpreting. What is within your power is entirely different, and it is frankly far more valuable. You control how you interpret their silence. You control whether you use this time to rebuild yourself or to dismantle yourself further. You control what story you tell about your own worth. You control your next action, your next thought, your next breath, and the meaning you assign to all of it. Epictetus put it bluntly. He said that of the things that exist, some are in our power and others are not. He warned that if you think only the things in your own power are your own, and what belongs to others remains as it truly is, belonging to others, then no one will ever be able to compel you or place any obstacle in your way. You will find fault with no one. You will accuse no one. You will do nothing against your will. No one will harm you, and you will have no enemy. Notice what he's not saying. He is not saying pretend you don't care. He is not saying suppress your feelings or numb yourself into some emotionless robot. That is a common and lazy misreading of Stoicism, and if you've heard that Stoics are cold or emotionless, please know that is not what this philosophy teaches, and it's not what we teach here on this channel. What he is saying is far more liberating than suppression. He is saying stop investing your peace, your identity, your entire sense of worth in something you were never able to control in the first place. Redirect that same energy, that same intensity, into the one domain where you actually hold power, which is your own inner world. This is not resignation. This is where real strength begins. Part 5. The story of Seneca and the loss that nearly broke him. Let me tell you about Seneca, because Seneca understood loss in a way that most self-help gurus today could never fake. Seneca lost his son. He lost his position twice. He was exiled to a barren island called Corsica for 8 years on trumped-up charges, separated from his wife, his friends, his entire former life, for a crime historians still aren't entirely sure he committed. Later in life, he was ordered by the Emperor Nero, a man he had once tutored as a boy, to take his own life, on the mere suspicion of disloyalty. If anyone had the right to be permanently and justifiably shattered, it was Seneca. And yet in his letters, we find some of the most profound writing on grief and loss in the history of philosophy. In one of his most famous letters, written to console a grieving mother named Marcia who had lost her son, Seneca does not tell her to stop feeling. He does not scold her for crying. Instead, he walks her through something remarkable. He reminds her that everything we have was only ever on loan from fortune, never truly owned by us in the first place. Fortune, he says, gives us nothing outright as our own possession. Everything we have, our positions, our loved ones, even our own lives, was always borrowed and can be recalled at any moment without our consent. Now apply this directly to your situation. The relationship you had, the version of them that loved you, the future you imagined together. None of it was ever truly yours to keep in the permanent sense. It was on loan, not because love is meaningless, but because everything external to your own character was always subject to change, decay, and loss. This is not a cynical view. It is, paradoxically, the view that allows you to love fully while suffering less, because you stop being shocked and destroyed when the loan comes due. Seneca writes elsewhere about the practice the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. He suggests that we should regularly imagine loss before it happens, not to become pessimists, not to poison our present happiness with dread, but to inoculate ourselves against the shock of loss when it inevitably arrives, because it always eventually does, to every single one of us, in one form or another. If you had practiced this before your heartbreak, would the silence hurt less? Perhaps. But here is the good news for those of you watching this after the fact, after the silence has already begun. You can still apply this wisdom retroactively. You can look at your loss now and say, this was always something that could have ended. Its ending does not erase its meaning while it existed. Its ending does not make me a failure. Its ending simply confirms what Seneca knew all along. Nothing external was ever permanent, and my peace was never supposed to depend on its permanence. Part 6. The body remembers, but it does not have to rule you. Let's talk honestly for a moment about the physical experience of this kind of pain, because I don't want this video to feel disconnected from what you are actually feeling in your body right now. When someone we loved goes silent, especially after a relationship that mattered, the body responds almost identically to physical withdrawal. Researchers have found that social rejection activates some of the same neural pathways as physical pain. Your chest tightening, your appetite disappearing or spiking, your inability to sleep, the way your stomach drops every time your phone buzzes and it isn't them. None of this is weakness. None of this is dramatic or excessive. This is a real physiological, evolutionarily ancient response. Because humans are wired for connection, and the sudden absence of it registers in the body as a threat to survival itself. The Stoics were not dismissive of the body. Marcus Aurelius himself acknowledged that we are composed of both flesh and the ruling faculty of the mind, and that the flesh will feel what it feels. What Stoicism offers is not a denial of the body's reaction, but a refusal to let the ruling faculty, the mind, the seat of judgment, be enslaved by that reaction. Think of it like this: the wave of grief that hits your chest when a memory surfaces, that is the body. It will come, it will hurt, and trying to fight it directly often makes it worse. But whether you follow that wave with an hour of scrolling through old photos, whether you follow it by texting them something you'll regret, whether you follow it by telling yourself a story about how you'll never find love again, that is the mind, the ruling faculty, and that part is yours to direct. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If you spend your days marinating in thoughts of unworthiness, replaying the silence as a verdict against your value, your soul, your entire inner disposition, will take on that color. It will become gray, heavy, and joyless. But if you spend your days, even in the middle of grief, choosing thoughts rooted in your own inherent worth, your own capacity to endure, your own history of surviving difficult things before, your soul takes on an entirely different color. Not fake positivity, not denial, but a steady, quiet strength. I want to pause here and ask you something directly. What color has your mind been marinating in this week? Be honest with yourself, even if you don't say it out loud. Awareness of the pattern is the first act of taking back your ruling faculty. Part 7. The danger of waiting for their return as your definition of healing. There is a trap that catches almost everyone who goes through no contact, and it is subtle enough that most people don't notice. They've fallen into it until months have passed. The trap is this: secretly measuring your own healing by whether they come back. You tell yourself you are doing no contact for you, to build your own strength, to rediscover your own life. And on the surface, that's true. But underneath, if you are honest, there is often a quiet hope humming in the background. A hope that if you do this well enough, if you become impressive enough, if you heal visibly enough, they will notice, they will regret leaving, and they will return. This is where the ancient philosophy becomes almost uncomfortably direct with us. Epictetus would ask you plainly, whose approval are you actually seeking? If your entire process of self-improvement is secretly aimed at their eventual validation, then you have not left the relationship at all. You have simply changed its form. You are still handing them the keys to your emotional state. You have just disguised it as personal growth. Real healing, the kind the Stoics describe, does not have a return clause. It is not conditional on them noticing, texting, or regretting anything. Real healing looks like this. You build your strength, your peace, your character, and if they never reach out again for the rest of your life, if you never receive that apology or explanation you feel you're owed, your healing remains completely intact. It does not collapse. It does not need them to complete it. It was never dependent on them in the first place. This is an incredibly hard thing to accept, especially in the early weeks and months. And I want to be honest with you that it took the Stoics themselves years, sometimes decades of practice to embody this fully. This is not a switch you flip. It is a discipline you return to daily, sometimes hourly, the way you might return again and again to a physical exercise, strengthening a muscle that has atrophied. But here is the reward waiting on the other side of that discipline. When your peace is no longer contingent on their choices, you become, in the truest Stoic sense, free. Not free from feeling, free from being owned. And there is no silence, no absence, no length of no contact that can touch a person who has reclaimed that kind of freedom. If you've caught yourself in this trap, secretly healing for them rather than for yourself, you are not alone, and there is no shame in it. Drop a comment with the word "caught" if this section just described you. I promise you, half the people reading these comments will feel less alone, seeing that word repeated over and over. Part 8. What Marcus Aurelius would say about checking their profile at midnight. Let's get specific, because philosophy that doesn't touch your actual daily behavior isn't worth much. Let's talk about the phone in your hand. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth, faced constant war, plague, and betrayal from people he trusted, and still found time to write private reminders to himself about the pettiest of human temptations, the small daily choices that either build or erode our character. In Meditations, he repeatedly returns to a single practice, pausing before reacting, examining the impression before accepting it as true, asking whether an action serves his higher purpose or merely his lower impulses. Apply this the next time your thumb hovers over their name at midnight. Before you open that profile, before you check if they've posted, before you reread that old message thread for the 100th time, pause. Ask yourself the question a Stoic emperor might have asked in that exact moment. What am I hoping to find? What impression am I about to accept as truth? And most importantly, will this action move me toward the person I am trying to become, or will it drag me back into the exact cycle I claimed I wanted to break? This is not about willpower in the way we usually think of it, gritting your teeth and forcing yourself to resist. It is about awareness, catching the impulse in the moment before it becomes an action, examining it honestly and then choosing. Sometimes you will still check. You are human, and this is a process, not a single dramatic moment of transformation. But each time you pause and examine, even if you ultimately still check, you are strengthening the exact muscle that will one day allow you not to. Marcus Aurelius has a passage where he reminds himself that very little is needed to make a happy life. that it is all within a person's own thinking. This isn't naive optimism from a man who never suffered. This is hard-won wisdom from a man who buried multiple children, who spent nearly 2 decades of his reign fighting wars on the frontier, who was betrayed by people close to him, and who still, in the privacy of his own journal, kept returning to the same fundamental truth. The mind that stops outsourcing its peace to external events becomes nearly unshakable. Part 9. The discipline of assent, or how to stop believing every painful thought. There is a specific Stoic practice that deserves its own dedicated attention here, because it is perhaps the single most practical tool available to anyone drowning in the aftermath of someone else's silence. The Stoics called it the discipline of assent. Here is how it works. Throughout the day, impressions arrive in your mind constantly, unbidden. An impression is simply a thought, a mental image, an interpretation that pops up automatically. They've already moved on. I was never good enough for them. This silence proves I'm unlovable. I'll never feel this way about anyone again. These impressions arrive whether you invite them or not. This part is not entirely within your control, and the Stoics never claimed it was. But here is the crucial distinction. You do not have to assent to every impression that arrives. Assent means agreement, acceptance, treating the impression as verified truth. The discipline of assent is the practice of pausing between the impression and your agreement with it, creating a small gap, and in that gap, examining whether the impression is actually true, or whether it is simply a painful thought that arrived uninvited and does not deserve automatic belief. Let's practice this together right now with one of the most common impressions that arises during no contact. The thought comes, "Their silence proves I was never enough." Before assenting to this, examine it the way a Stoic would. Is this actually a fact, verifiable and certain? Or is it an interpretation, one story among many possible stories? Could their silence instead mean they are struggling with their own unresolved issues that have nothing to do with your worth? Could it mean they are avoidant, conflict-averse, unable to face what happened? Could it mean 100 things, entirely disconnected from any verdict on your value as a human being? The moment you realize the thought is an interpretation rather than a fact, you have already weakened its grip. You do not have to argue with it forever. You simply decline to assent. You let it pass through, the way you'd let a stranger's opinion pass through without adopting it as your own identity. This practice, done consistently day after day, is not a magic cure. It will not erase the ache instantly, but it is the exact mechanism by which the Stoics built what they called an inner citadel, a fortress of judgment that external events, no matter how painful, could not breach without your permission. Part 10. The story of the man who wished for his suffering back. There's a lesser-known but deeply powerful anecdote from Stoic tradition, sometimes attributed to teachings around Diogenes and later echoed by Stoic writers, about a man who had endured tremendous hardship and who, upon finally reaching a period of ease and comfort, found himself strangely restless, almost missing the intensity of struggle. This tells us something important about human nature. We often mistake intensity for meaning, and the absence of pain for emptiness. I share this because many of you, watching this right now, are afraid that if you truly let go of the pain surrounding this silence, if you truly stopped ruminating, checking and hoping, you will be left with nothing, as if the suffering itself has become a kind of substitute intimacy with the person who left, a way of still holding on to them, even through pain. This is one of the most important truths I can offer you tonight. Your suffering is not a monument to your love. It is not proof of how much they mattered. You do not need to keep bleeding to prove the relationship was real or that your feelings were genuine. Letting go of the compulsive replaying, the midnight checking, the constant reinterpreting of their silence does not erase what the relationship meant. It simply stops the self-inflicted wound. The love was real, whether or not you continue to suffer over its ending. The two are not the same thing, and confusing them is one of the cruelest tricks the mind plays on a grieving heart. Part 11. Building the Inner Citadel While the World Stays Silent. Marcus Aurelius uses an image throughout meditations that I want you to carry with you long after this video ends. He describes retreating not to the countryside, not to the mountains, not to any physical location, but into himself, into his own soul, as a place of retreat more peaceful than any external location could ever provide. He writes that nowhere can a person find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in their own soul, particularly one who possesses within themselves the kind of resources that, the moment they gaze inward, immediately produce complete ease. He urges himself, and by extension all of us, to constantly grant ourselves this retreat and to renew ourselves within it. This is the deepest medicine available to you during the silence you are currently enduring. You are right now in the middle of an enforced retreat, whether you asked for it or not. The person is gone. The messages have stopped. The distractions of that relationship, the texting, the planning, the emotional labor of managing someone else's needs and moods, all of it has been stripped away. What remains is you, alone with your own mind, perhaps for the first time in a long time. This can feel unbearable. It can also, if you allow it, become the exact opportunity the Stoics describe. An opportunity to build something inside yourself that no future silence, no future rejection, no future person's choices can ever again fully destabilize. This is not about becoming someone who no longer needs connection or love. The Stoics were not hermits advocating isolation. Marcus Aurelius loved deeply, valued his relationships, and believed strongly in our social duties to one another. This is about building a self that can enter future relationships from a place of wholeness rather than desperation, a self that loves fully, without requiring that love to be reciprocated perfectly in order to remain intact. Part 12. Amor fati, or loving. This exact chapter of your life. There's a phrase that the Stoics and later philosophers who drew from them used to describe the highest expression of this entire worldview, amor fati, the love of one's fate, not merely accepting what has happened, not merely tolerating it through gritted teeth, but actively embracing it as necessary material for the person you are becoming. I know how this might sound right now, especially if the wound is fresh. How could I possibly love this chapter? The chapter where someone I cared about simply vanished from my life without explanation. I'm not asking you to pretend the pain doesn't exist or to fake gratitude you don't feel. I'm asking you to consider a different question entirely. What if this exact experience, painful as it is, becomes the very thing that forges the depth, the resilience, and the self-possession you will carry into everything that comes after it? Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action advances action, that what stands in the way becomes the way. Every person you have ever admired for their depth, their groundedness, their emotional strength, developed those qualities through exactly this kind of fire. Nobody becomes unshakable by only experiencing ease. The silence you are enduring right now, as unwanted as it is doing something to you beneath the surface. Whether you can feel it yet or not, it is teaching you forcibly the exact lessons this entire video has described. That your worth was never external, that your peace was never truly theirs to give or take, that you are capable of surviving something that once felt unsurvivable. One day, and I promise you this day will come even if it feels impossible right now, you will look back on this exact period, this silence, this ache, and you will recognize it not as the moment you were broken, but as the moment you began building something in yourself that could never again be shattered by someone else's choice to disappear. Part 13. A direct word to you, watching this right now. I want to step outside the philosophy for just a moment and speak to you directly, one human to another. If you are watching this at 2 a.m., if you came to this video because you searched for something, anything, that might make the ache in your chest smaller tonight, I see you. This channel exists because of people exactly like you, and I don't take that lightly. The silence you're experiencing right now, the not knowing, the waiting, the wondering if they think about you at all, it is genuinely hard. Nothing in this video is meant to minimize that, but I want you to hear something clearly before we close. You are not broken because this hurts. You are not weak because you've checked their profile more times than you'd like to admit. You are simply human, living through one of the oldest and most universal forms of pain there is. Every single person who has ever lived, including Marcus Aurelius, including Seneca, including Epictetus himself, has stood exactly where you are standing now, in some form. What separates suffering that consumes a life from suffering that becomes the foundation of a stronger one is not the absence of pain. It is the decision, made quietly, privately, sometimes made and remade 100 times a day, to stop handing your peace to something outside of your control and to start rebuilding your inner citadel, one honest thought at a time. If this video has given you even a small piece of relief tonight, I would be so grateful if you would hit like on your way out. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are lying awake with the same ache you came here with. And if you want more of this, more ancient wisdom applied directly to the pain you're actually living through, subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics. We post new videos like this regularly because this work, the work of building an unshakable inner life, is never truly finished. It is a daily practice, and I would be honored to walk that path alongside you. Part 14. The Closing Reflection. Let's end where every good Stoic practice ends. Not with a grand transformation, not with a promise that tomorrow you'll wake up completely healed, but with a small, honest, daily reminder. Tonight, when the silence feels loud, when your mind reaches for the phone, when the old thought arrives, whispering that their absence is a verdict on your worth, remember Epictetus, once enslaved, once broken in body, who built a freedom so complete that no master, no exile, no silence could ever touch it again. Remember Seneca, who lost nearly everything fortune could take, and who still found the words to comfort a grieving mother with truths that outlived them both by 2,000 years. Remember Marcus Aurelius, an emperor who buried his own children and still returned, night after night, to the same simple journal entry, that the obstacle is the way, that the soul takes the color of its thoughts, and that within himself always was a retreat more peaceful than anywhere the world could offer him. Their silence is not your sentence. It never was. You hold the pen now. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If these words found you at the right moment, tell me in the comments what part of this resonated with you most. I read every single one, and I promise you, someone else scrolling through these comments tomorrow night at 2 a.m. will find exactly what they needed in your words, the same way you may have found it in mine tonight. Until next time, this has been Wisdom of the Stoics. Stay strong, stay grounded, and remember, you were never as alone in this as the silence made you feel.